1988.
Yep.
My name is Joe Todd, and this is an interview with Mr. Tony Ciccone. We're in Kansas City, Missouri, but you live in Bremerton, Washington. Sir, where were you born?
Newton, Massachusetts.
And when's your birthday?
October 23, 1911.
You go through school there in Newton?
Yes.
And why'd you join the Navy?
Times were tough in 1928, and I just had the wanderlust to do something. So I left school my second year in high school, joined the Navy.
And you joined the Navy what year?
1928,
What month?
October.
October. Why the Navy over the Army or the Marines?
One time the grade schools took us down to Boston Navy Yard on a tour for the children, and there was two destroyers tied up side by side, and there was a Florida or Battleship on the other side of the pier. And these sailors were reading their mail and talking, all so happy. And I figured, well, that's for me. Those guys are having a good time. And we went aboard the Florida, not the destroyers. But the Battleship never impressed me at all. Just the sailors on the forecastle of that destroyer, it was mail call, and that was what got my attention. And it just stayed with me till I was 17 years old, and I figured, well, I must well make a move. I'm not too happy here. So I joined the Navy.
And where'd you go for boot camp?
Newport, Rhode Island.
Tell me about boot camp.
Well, Newport in October, November, December, January is very cold. And the wind always blows in Newport. And of course it was a brand new life. You saluted everybody you seen. And you had drills of certain type just to keep yourself occupied. 9 o'clock, the lights went out, and you got in your hammock and you went to sleep. And you're up at 5:30 in the morning, and you were standing useless watches just to teach you discipline. So that was my training.
And how long did boot camp last?
About 4 months, because we had a sickness in the group which delayed us some. We were quarantined, in other words.
Meningitis or?
No. I believe it was meningitis, but not bad.
Yeah.
Whoever had it got over it in a hurry.
And from boot camp, where'd you go?
Boot camp, I went to the Oklahoma. February 1929, I reported aboard her.
And where'd you board the Oklahoma?
Philadelphia Naval Shipyard.
When you first saw the Oklahoma, what'd you think of it?
Well, at that age, you know, everything looked great. Or terrible, and I thought it was great. But it was still under remodernization. It wasn't a clean-looking ship because it was pulling Navy Yard employees and shipping paint and all that sort of thing. But we left there in early spring and went to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba for underway training. Then come on to the West Coast where we stayed most of the time.
Where were your quarters in the Oklahoma?
The crew lived forward on the Oklahoma, forward on the starboard side. I was in the 1st Division, deck division.
And what was your rank when you went on board?
Apprentice seaman.
Describe your quarters on the ship.
The quarters?
Yeah.
Well, just a compartment with bunks 3 high and lockers. The lockers are reasonably small. You didn't have many clothes anyway. And it was crowded, but there was plenty of room. Because after all, the ship is not there for comfort, it's there to support the gunnery.
And who was your division officer?
We had Lieutenant Martin at that time. Well, he was only there for a couple of years.
His camera, too.
Oh, I don't recall the other, because you're going back 50-some years ago.
What details did you have in the deck force?
Just general seamanship things: cleaning, sweeping, swabbing, scraping paint, painting.
Would you describe the difference between swabbing the deck and holding stone the deck? What's the difference?
Well, you swab Well, you swab, use a swab or a mop. The holy stone is a brick. It's a fire brick which you put over sand. You wet the decks, put sand there, and the holy stone. Then you go over the boards.
And how often did you holy stone the deck?
Every Friday.
Every Friday. And how often did you swab the deck?
Every day.
Every day.
That is compartments too. Lower decks also.
Yeah. What did you do for recreation on the Oklahoma?
See, there wasn't just movies, but that is weather permitting. In port we'd have them, but other than that, no, there was no recreation. We didn't have radios or anything at that time.
What about church services?
Beg pardon?
What about church services?
Every Sunday there's church service. Church of your choice. And during church service there was no smoking or noise about the deck or any kind of games. That is cards, naturally, or AC-doocy or that sort of thing.
Now you said the church of your choice. How many chaplains were on board the Oklahoma? Two.
Protestant and a Catholic.
What about with any Jews in the...
Yes. At that time, I don't think we had any rabbis around. Not that they must have been on the fleet someplace. But later in my Navy career, I know they had rabbis because on carriers once in a while they'd come aboard, or the Jews would go to whatever ship the rabbi was assigned to. He would be in a staff job more than likely.
And were you required to go to church?
No.
Tell me about the cruise down to Guantanamo. Anything happen?
Well, that's underway training where all the evolutions in the ship are finally put to test. And there's gunnery exercises. And the engineers, of course, had a new plant, had to work the bugs out of. Gunnery had their drills. And we was down there. Well, at that time, the Atlantic Fleet would go south in the winter and come back in May. Of course, we have a Navy base there in Guantanamo. Sheltered water, so we'd go in there and anchor almost every night.
You go through the canal in the Oklahoma.
Oh, yes.
How did they keep the Oklahoma from hitting the sides of the canal when they went through?
They have what they call mules. They're mechanical tractors, actually, with wires. They run tracks, and they keep it. The pilots, of course, instruct them which mule to pull to keep it in the center. There was no problem with the Oklahoma because the canals are 110 feet wide, and she was only about 80 feet. Plenty of leeway.
And how long did a trip to the canal take?
About 8 hours.
8 hours?
It's about 50 miles. And it would depend on the traffic, of course.
I was going to ask, did you request the Oklahoma?
No.
No. So you were just assigned to it?
You didn't get to request ships from the training station.
You didn't? Okay. Who was captain when you went on board?
Julius Helwig.
Did you know him?
I knew of him. The captain was a big wheel in them years. He later became head of the Naval Observatory, and when I guess he was still in the Navy as a captain, he never made admiral.
From Guantanamo, where'd you go?
Back to Philadelphia.
Was that the shakedown cruise?
That's right, it was a shakedown cruise. Underway training and the shakedown cruise combined.
What is the difference between a regular cruise and a shakedown cruise?
Shakedown when you leave the Navy Yard. When you had repairs, mainly at the engines, you have to go out and test them out and put them to work hard to see if they're going to stand the pressures. And gunnery too, you'll train the gunneries, that is turrets and that sort of thing. Shakedown cruise is a pleasure cruise ordinarily. You go to some port just to help the economy, go ashore and spend money.
Anything out of the ordinary happened from the shakedown cruise until 1933?
No, no.
What maneuvers or what cruises did you make?
Well, maneuvers I had nothing to do with, of course, being a seaman. I just stood watching and done as I was told.
Where was your station during general quarters?
I was in turret 1,
What was your duty at?
a powder handler.
And how far below the turret is the powder handle?
Powder handler I was, we were adjacent to the guns themselves, but we were in a compartment. We were not in the gun chamber, let's put it that way. The pilot come up on a hoist to us, and we just push it on through with other men, then push it in the gun chamber. When they open the hatch they want, they're ready for it.
Were you on board in 33 during the earthquake?
Yeah.
Tell me what happened.
Well, we had this serious earthquake in Long Beach, California at that time. And I just gone ashore, a friend of mine, and we was in the law, just left the pier in Long Beach, the Fleet Landing. At the Navy Field, which is adjoining there, they had the all-Navy boxing bouts that Saturday afternoon. And they were just over. And the place was crowded. We was walking down to what they call the Pike in Long Beach, which is maybe half a mile, which is... We was going over a low bridge in the Los Angeles River, which is really nothing but a creek. There's no water in it. But we were on that bridge, we could hear this rumbling, and this bridge was shaking violently. And I could see the water was shooting up out of the creek then, because it disturbed the underwater part too, but nothing happened. Everyone just kept moving downtown. There wasn't panic, but people were really scared because of broken glass, chimneys falling down. And there was no need to stay ashore because the conditions of the thing, we went back to ship. And the next day, they set up martial law, and we was sent ashore and put in different places just for the looting. Of course, the looters started in as soon as the windows fell out downtown.
Where'd you go?
Well, my spot was a place called Funston Park, was just on the edge of the city. And people were sleeping in their cars because they were afraid to get in the house, because there was rumbles all the time, or every now and then. And the biggest hazard was the chimney falling down when you get in the house. And most of the casualties came from that. People run out of the house and the chimney come down at the same time. We never had any problem except that they put us out there so confused. You never know if you're going to get relieved or not. Thank God the Boy Scouts are coming around with baskets in a wagon and give us cookies and hot chocolate. Other than that, there was no provisions made. But that didn't last too long. Once they got the windows all boarded up and the debris cleaned away, and the city figured the police could handle it, which they handled it in the first place, our people were just there as a deterrent to others to don't try anything. And we went back and resumed our normal naval career, which is training, gun training, maintenance.
Were you carrying weapons when you were...
Yes, I don't reckon.
What were you carrying?
30-06. But we did not have ammunition. But they didn't know it, in case somebody... But there wasn't that much violence. Matter of fact, there was no violence. The looters got it before people settled down, whatever was taken, because you never know.
How did the earthquake affect the Oklahoma?
None at all. None at all.
Did it shake or shatter the ship, or...?
Oh, the ships feel it. You feel an earthquake when you're in a ship. Because the ground underneath is shaking, the water will too.
So after 33?
That was in 33, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where'd you go from Long Beach?
What?
Where'd you go from Long Beach in 33?
Well, that was our home port, San Pedro and Long Beach area. And we trained out of there. The summer months, we'd go north to San Francisco, Seattle. It was fleet weeks, show the flag sort of thing, and we'd parade in these towns. And sport events. If we had a baseball team, which we did, they would play the local people. And there was always training underway. You just didn't go from here to there. Like San Francisco, maybe a 2-day run. It might take us 6 days to get there, because we just went to sea and trained come back in when they were expected to arrive in port.
Were you on board when the Oklahoma broke the rudder shaft?
Yes. Well, at that time we was heading for Seattle for some reason, and the port propeller just fell off for no reason whatsoever. We was cruising along. We generally cruised at 10 knots, which is not fast, but in them days 10 knots is pretty good. So we had to go in the Navy Yard, and they put us in dry dock and pull the stub of the shaft out, put it blanked off the hole, and floated and put it alongside the dock, and had to wait for a shaft to come by water from the East Coast, which took about 6 weeks. We were there a long time. Of course, we liked it very much. It was summer months, so that was just strictly maintenance then.
What caused that shaft to break?
I wouldn't know, but fatigue sets in the metal too.
I heard the Oklahoma lost an anchor. Was it?
Not during my time.
Were you on board when you sunk the freight train?
Nope, I was gone then.
And when did you leave the Oklahoma?
December of 1936.
December 36. Tell me about the midshipman cruise, 36.
Well, every summer they make a cruise of middies to Europe, and we had the Arkansas, Wyoming, and the Oklahoma, 3 battleships. We left in June from Annapolis, went over to Europe, and we was in Cherbourg, France, which was our last port of call before coming to return to the States. And we got the word that a revolution had erupted in Spain. Well, I was a master at arms. Those boats made second class on the master at arms force, and you could tell something was wrong because people were just not moving like they did before. That is, people in the know. So we had people on a tour like any place else, and they were in Paris, of course. So the Paris radio, and policemen were carrying signs to American sailors to return to their ship. I never got there myself. I missed out. I was going on the second tour, which never happened. And we took on provisions, and we got rid of the midshipmen, put them on the Arky in Wyoming, because we didn't know when they'd be back. If we were any civilian correspondents wanted to come aboard, but they let 2 aboard, and one was a national known person at that time, Floyd Gibbons. He had a patch over one eye. I don't recall which eye it was, but he was something like Ernie Pyle in the later years. And when we left, we went down and we picked up any nationality except Spanish. The consulates in these ports would evidently call the ship and say, we have so many people. And we'd taken when we had what we could carry, because living conditions like the women and children was pretty rough. They moved the warrant officers out of their quarters, and some of the junior officers, to put the women and children there. There's a little town thing's called St. Jean Barut's, just on the French-Spanish border. And we'd go there and unload these people, then go right back down. And when we got all the calls on the Atlantic, we'd go on the Mediterranean, and we'd get as far as, well, it was in Malaga, which is a Navy base, so we had to move there because there was trouble. But Barcelona was the largest, or the farthest east port we made. Them people we put off in Gibraltar. How they got out of Gibraltar was their problem, because it's certainly not the main thoroughfare. But we was there 6 or 8 weeks, I guess. And we got the word we're going to get relieved. And 2 destroyers and a cruiser, I believe it was the Omaha light cruiser and the Hatfield and the Kane, relieved us. So in typical naval fashion, we got underway and the band played California, Here We Come. So we were heading back for the West Coast. And that was the midi cruise part.
Did you have any trouble with the Spanish when you picking up the
No. Although we was having a movie one night in Santander, it's on the Atlantic side, and a cruiser, a rebel cruiser was coming into port without any lights. So we went to general quarters, of course, to cut the movie off and get underway. We left the boat ashore, the boat and crew and an officer. And we just went to sea and come back in the next day. And this cruiser had lobbed, according to our people on the boat, lobbed a few shells in the town, just nuisance firing. But we picked up that boat and we moved wherever we was called to go, either north or south.
How did you bring the refugees on board the Oklahoma?
We had a crane in the stern that picks up the airplanes, aircraft plane. Well, they had a big canvas bag, which you call the coaling bag, and they run lines through snatch blocks, which are fair leads, over the side, and they just load that into the boat, our boat, and people, 2 or 3 people get in that thing. And then there was 6 or 8 men on deck have this line in hand, and when they were told to heave around, they just pick it up and run up the deck, and they train the crane in and set them down, get the people out. Some of them are seasick, the poor souls, but we got them out of the boat. And it was pretty rough in some cases. And we just kept doing that till we got them all out of there.
Why didn't you use a regular gangplank?
It's too rough.
Too rough?
Rough. Because that boat's not going to stay aside alongside that platform. You're up and down, and even some of our sailors get hurt at times. If you hit the wrong time, you get your legs right in the way there. What we done was a safe, sane way to do it.
I heard there's a baby born on the Oklahoma during that time.
A what?
A baby born on the Oklahoma?
No, I don't.
Just saying. How many refugees did you pick up all told?
I wouldn't know. Although I was always back there, but being a master at arms just to keep the other people away from the landing area. But the crew who could, they were, as you see pictures of ships of sails up around the guns in the high areas just watching. That's because we master at arms just kept them away from that area where they was doing the actual work.
What are the duties of the master at arms?
They're internal police force, basically. The chief master at arms, he comes under the executive officer, and we do whatever he tells him. There were 6 of us. We stand duty, turn the lights out at night, turn them on in the morning. If you're in an area where they want people to be in the proper uniform, it was our job to chase those below who did not have, say, a hat on or a jumper or whatever it might be.
When you were master at arms, what was your rank?
Boatswain 2nd class.
What does a boatswain do?
Seamanship evolutions.
What's that?
Anything concerning seamanship, boats, anchors, the appearance of the ship, rigging and that sort of thing.
Could you compare the Oklahoma to the other battleships, the crew, the officers?
No, there was nowhere to compare. The ship you're on is the best anyway.
When you left the Oklahoma, where'd you go?
I went to the Colorado, another battleship, and I stayed on her 4 years.
Now, why did you transfer from the Oklahoma to the Colorado?
Well, we'd been on the Oklahoma too long. It was pretty much of a clique. I was there 8 years myself. And we had excessive rates, so I was one. A lot of us left. And I went to the Colorado, and I spent 4 years on it.
Was it a good ship, Colorado?
It was a good ship, but it wasn't as good as the Oklahoma as far as I was concerned. Although I enjoyed it. But there's only 2 good ships in the Navy. The one you just left and the one you're going to. Where you're at, you can nitpick if you want to.
What made the Oklahoma better than the Colorado? Is that a fair question?
Because it was my first ship, I suppose. And I just did. Their operations were more lenient, if I might put it that way.
Where were you on December 7th? When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor?
December, I was tending bar down at Naval Air Station, Jacksonville, Florida. When I left the Colorado, I went to NAS Jacksonville. And December the 7th, they brought in a lot of these old-time chiefs that retired. and I had the duty that Sunday, and I went to, in my duties at barrack area, master at arms again there. The bartender, he was hired in a kite, so I says, well, I'll relieve you, go ahead and get a little shut-eye. Nothing to that, you know. And while I was, this nothing but beer, this little beer tap, and that's what it was. In come the word of Pearl Harbor to us. So I just shut the place down, run the guys out, left the money there, and locked her up and gone. And I give the key to the duty officer. And of course, we're very strict and everything then, because you didn't know what was going to happen. And I stayed there about 2.5 years in Jacksonville.
When you heard the Oklahoma had sunk, what was your reaction?
We didn't know it at that time. We didn't know what happened. Later on, of course, I lost a lot of shipmates on there. But we didn't know for a long time. They didn't put that word out, what happened. A lot of casualties and that. But my ship, well, the one I left, the Colorado, it was in San Francisco during Pearl Harbor. So I wouldn't have been at Pearl Harbor anyway.
Whenever anyone mentions the Oklahoma, what do you think of?
I'm just kind of proud to hear it. I enjoyed it very much.
Any particular events that happened on the Oklahoma that you haven't related that you think of?
I can't think of them. I was a reasonably successful baseball player in the fleet, but that was something else. Because in season, well, money was tight, so we were in port a lot. They had terrific football teams and good baseball teams. Because we would go ashore every day and practice. And it was good to be a jockstrap because you had a special mess then too, athletic mess. Only thing we got there, for breakfast we could order what we wanted. That is a 3rd egg instead of 2, something like that. But it's a big thing when you see them.
Well, what did you do in the war?
What?
What did you do during the war?
What I do? Well, I made warrant officer when I was in Jacksonville. I had been chief boatswain's mate. And I went and I was commissioning crew of the Hornet CB-8. CB-12, I beg your pardon. The 8 is the one that was sunk. And I spent the war on the Hornet in the Western Pacific. After that, I come back and I got asked to Oregon for about 9 months. Then I went to Philadelphia, commissioning crew of the Valley Forge, another carrier. I served in 3 carriers during my time.
Were you on the Hornet when Doolittle made his raid?
That was the CB-8, the first one.
First.
He did not make it up to 12.
Okay.
The reason they renamed the Hornet was going to be the Kearsarge. And Tokyo Rose knew the Hornet had been sunk, and she was making noises about that. So they renamed the Kearsarge the Hornet. They also renamed a Yorktown and a Wasp for the Yorktown and Waspville lost to confuse Tokyo Rose. Because she was kind of a power. See, all the conversation was about your women folks. And she would, well, you didn't believe it, but it was hard to live with. And she knew it, yeah.
Anything else about the Oklahoma?
Yeah?
Anything else about the Oklahoma?
No, I can't. So many things happened in 8 years, but nothing outstanding, no.
Okay, well, I think we have a good interview.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, I need to get your autograph if I can. Right.
Where?
Right
Yeah?
there. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.